Hi, I'm Tony Northrup with Train Signal, and in this video lesson, we're going to be covering how to install and configure Windows Store applications. This is Objective 2.3 for the Microsoft Certification Exam 70-687, and this objective has 4 official sub-objectives: install, reinstall, and update Windows Store applications. That basically covers really simple stuff where you go to the store and install an app and then remove it and manage the apps. Anyway, it's all really simplistic and any user can handle it. So that's easy. You also learn how to restrict Windows Store content, and that gets a little bit more complex, but we'll show you the group policy settings that you need to know. We'll learn how to add internal content. In the olden days, when everything was a desktop app, you could just install any app. However, with Windows Store apps, it's a little bit more complicated. The average user isn't allowed to install any random app. So there's a process called sideloading that enterprises can use to distribute their own internally developed apps or apps that they've purchased that aren't available on the store. And the final sub-objective, which we're going to cover when we cover policy, is to disable the Windows Store. So let's dig right in here and learn how to manage Windows Store apps. So here we are on the Windows 8 start screen, and we'll go over the experience that the average user has with the store. Now, unlike with Windows 7 and even with desktop apps in Windows 8, where you get an app by basically searching the web and then finding the software distributor's website and downloading something, and then you run setup.exe, and it installs the app, and maybe you configure some options, and then if you change your mind about it, you go into the control panel and you uninstall it. It's this long, complex process. In Windows 8, with these Windows Store apps, it's so much easier. So let's just grab a free app. All right, how about we get the Microsoft Mahjong? Who doesn't like a little Mahjong? All right, so there are a few things you should notice about Windows Store apps. For example, they're categorized. This is categorized in games puzzle. It shows you how big the app is. It shows you the publisher, and that's a publisher who's actually signed it. So because every app goes through the Microsoft approval process to get on the store, you have some assurance on who the publisher actually is, and therefore things like Trojan horses or apps that might impersonate another legitimate publisher while they're actually trying to sneak malware onto your computer, you have some assurance that that's not happening, at least as much as you trust Microsoft's own processes to validate the software. And I do trust them. They have content rating, so you can see that this particular app is rated for everybody. If a game has violence in it or some other content that might be objectionable, it would have a different rating. And that's really useful because in your organization, you can restrict which apps people can install. And at home, you could stop your kids from downloading apps that you didn't feel was appropriate for them. Now, security-wise, you can see an interesting section over here that says this app has permission to use. And you can see it has permission to use your internet connection. Every app on the Windows Store has very restricted permissions, and apps don't get access to anything more than they actually need. So if Mahjong here wanted to save a file to your documents folder, couldn't do it. It does have access to a little bit of very private storage, but it can't open up your tax returns or confidential documents and send them across the internet. It's completely isolated. So because it has access to your internet connection, it could send stuff that it knows. Like if it wanted to upload whether you're good at Mahjong or not, it could do that. But it couldn't get to your confidential files that aren't part of this app. That's great. By default, everything runs in a very isolated, what they call a sandbox. Apps can't really talk to each other and they can't access your files unless the app has specific permission to use it. For example, lots of these new devices have location sensing capabilities. A new tablet computer will have a GPS in it. If the app was able to access your location, who knows? It might be reporting to the internet your whereabouts without your knowledge. Well, Mahjong couldn't do this, even if the developers managed to sneak some malicious code in there, because it doesn't have access to the location awareness information. It only has access to the internet connection and really nothing else besides your interactions with the app itself. Now, there's nothing to download manually here. You don't have to worry about whether it's a setup file. You just click install. And of course it requires some credentials. So this is asking me for a Microsoft account. Because I'm logging in with a domain account rather than a Microsoft account, it needs a Microsoft account username and password. My Microsoft account is linked to my credit card, so if I buy an app that's not free, it can charge me automatically. Now, you'll see what's popped up here, and this wasn't intentional, but it's fortuitous nonetheless. I've reached the PC limit for my account. Each Windows Store account can only be linked to 5 PCs, and that's going to be more than enough for most people. They're just trying to prevent somebody from giving out their Windows Store account information to hundreds or thousands of people and having everybody pay for the apps only once. Because once you buy a Windows Store app, you can install it on any of your computers. You're probably familiar with this model. Like, that's the model that the Apple Store uses. So if you have an iPhone and an iPad, you buy an app once and then you can install it everywhere. So that's what the Windows Store is doing. You buy it once in the Windows Store and then you can install it on all of your Windows 8 PCs. As long as you don't have more than 5 PCs. I work with virtual machines a lot, so you'll see that I have a bunch of different computers here. Not all of them are things I'm actively using, so I can remove one of these before continuing on it. So now that I've removed one of the computers, this virtual machine is now one of my 5 registered machines, and it will allow me to install it. You can see up here it shows that it's installing my app. That's all it takes. There's no wizard to walk through. If you want to watch the progress, you can click up here and watch it downloading, but you don't need to. You could just go about your life, and once it's done, it will pop up a notification showing you that the app is installed. That's right. There's never an option for installing a Windows Store app. They always go in with the default settings. It's up to you later. You can go in and perhaps modify the settings if the app allows it, but you never have to click next, choose a folder to install it in. Nope. All of that happens automatically. The user's completely unaware. So now installing apps is suddenly much easier, and any user should be able to do it without any technical skills whatsoever. Now, of course, in an enterprise environment, this might not be what you want. You probably actually don't want people installing Mahjong on the new Windows 8 PC that you've issued, but you can control that with group policy, and we'll show you how to do that in just a minute. All right, and here's that notification. So it pops right up here, and I'll jump back to the start screen. You can see whatever app I'd happen to be in, this would appear anyway. So now as I scroll through here, you can see the new app is available here. Besides the new installation method, you can see that Windows 8 apps have these nice tiles. They're typically live tiles that get updated automatically. This one doesn't have a live tile, but you can see the Bing app here does have a live tile, and it happens to be turned off now, but it'll update with different types of information. You can select it by right-clicking it or flicking it with your finger, and then from the menu bar down here, choose whether the live tile is on or off. I find it distracting, so I tend to turn them off. Launching apps, of course, just requires a click, and they fire right up. Now, I want to show you a couple other aspects of Microsoft Store apps that are unique. One is the use of these charms, and if you're already familiar with the Windows 8 user interface, you might already know this, but in desktop apps, if you wanted to change the app settings, you had to find the menu item on the menu bar, and sometimes it would be the edit menu and then options. Sometimes it would be file and then preferences. Sometimes it would be view and then preferences. In other words, the settings were always in kind of a different place, and it could be hard to keep track of. With Windows 8, it's always in the same place, and you get to it using the charms. So you can swipe in from the right on a touchscreen or hold down the Windows key and press C to open the charms. And down here you'll see settings. Now, what appears here is going to be specific to the app that you're currently running. So this is basically the settings menu for the app. Any app you run that's a Windows Store app that has this full screen touch interface, the options are going to be in exactly the same place. So that makes it much easier for users. There's no more like digging through the menus to try to find it. Another useful feature that's always centralized is search. Whenever you want to search within an app, pull up the charm and then click search. Similarly, if you want to share something, which means emailing a document that you're working on or posting something on Facebook, you'll open up the charms and click Share. And if you want to print something, you'll open up the charms and click Devices. So now we know how to install, run, and configure Windows Store apps, and it's really so easy. It doesn't take long. Let's talk about how to remove them. All you have to do is select the app. Again, you can flick it with your finger or right-click it with your mouse, and then click Uninstall. And that's it. It's gone. Now, one more thing, updates. And if you remember, updates in desktop apps could be pretty hard. Sometimes the app would require you to go into the help menu and look for check for updates. Sometimes you just have to think on your own to go to the manufacturer's website and see if they had a new version available. Sometimes the application would install a little agent that runs in your notification center and pops up every now and then to tell you there's a new update available, like JavaScript. Oh, what a pain. Seems like every week Java is popping up telling me I need to install an update. Well, it's much easier when you use Windows 8, Windows Store apps. You can see on the start screen here, there's a little 7 down here. That means I have 7 apps that have updates available. I can click it, and up here you'll see updates. Tells me there are 7. And this just lists the different apps that have updates available. I can install all the updates all at once by clicking Install. And Windows 8 takes care of the rest. I don't have to do anything. It downloads them, everything goes okay, it installs them. That's it. It's much easier than the way it works for Windows 8 apps. So let's move on to the next demonstration. Now let's go over a few critical group policy settings related to the Windows Store. I'll jump back to my Windows 8 Enterprise computer. And this is the group policy editor. These are the same policies that you'll see if you edit the policies for an Active Directory domain. So if you used a local group policy editor, as I am, you'd be configuring a single computer. In an enterprise, you'll typically do this on a domain controller so that it applies to either every computer in the domain or all the computers within a particular organizational unit. Most of the useful policies are stored under administrative templates, Windows components, and then store. You'll see 3 different policies here. The most important one is turn off the store application. If you enable this policy, the store app will simply not be available. Users can try to open it, but they'll get a denied message. This policy allows store to install apps on Windows to Go workspaces. Windows to Go allows you to install Windows 8 to a flash drive and then boot any computer as Windows 8 using your custom Windows 8 image. Now, you might want to turn off the store if you're running Windows 8 from Windows to Go, and here's why. As you saw earlier, you can only install Windows Store apps on up to 5 PCs. So if you're taking your flash drive and you're going around to a bunch of different computers and running Windows 8, you don't want to be installing apps on them because you'd be counting up the number of computers with Windows Store apps installed past 5 pretty quickly. In other words, if you had 2 computers that you used all the time, and then you installed Windows 8 on Windows to Go, and you went to 5 or 6 different internet kiosks and installed apps on all of them, well, you'd burn through those 5 computers that you're allowed to access Windows Store apps on pretty quickly. So you often want to simply disable this policy to prevent using the store on Windows to Go workspaces. Now, it's disabled by default. So if for some reason you know that your Windows to Go is only going to be used on 1 or 2 PCs, then you can go ahead and enable it, either for many computers or for your own computer. This first policy here, turn off automatic download of updates, does what you think it does. If you enable it, users will not be able to automatically get the updates, as I showed earlier. Generally, updates are a good thing, but some organizations like to control every update that gets installed. Now, there's another policy here under System, Internet Communication Management, and then Internet Communication Settings, and it is turn off access to the store. Now, this is different from the policy we showed that disables the store. If you enable this policy and don't modify any other policies, users will still be able to access the store and buy apps. This only controls whether the store is used when the user attempts to open a file with a new file type that doesn't already have an app available for it. So If you open up, say, a Word file and you don't have Word installed, Windows 8 by default will go to the store and suggest some apps that can open that file type. If you don't want users doing that, then you should enable this turn off access to the store policy. Now, before I show you what it's like when the store is disabled, I want to point out that the policy settings I just described are available under both computer configuration and user configuration. In a domain environment, if you modify the user configuration, then it will apply to all users within that group policy scope, no matter which computer they use. If you modify a computer configuration, it will apply to all computers within the scope, no matter which users access those computers. So I'll give this computer a quick reboot, and just to make sure the policy settings take effect, and then we will check out what happens when the store is disabled. So here's the error message that your users will see. Windows Store isn't available on this PC. Contact your systems administrator for more information. Not the experience you might want them to have, because after all, if they can't get to the store, why is the icon still on the start menu? So I'll show you really quickly how to remove that icon. First, we'll need to use File Explorer, so I'll jump to the desktop. Then I'm going to open up the Program Data folder. This is a hidden folder. Microsoft, Windows, Start menu, and then Programs. Under here are a list of links that you'll be able to access from the start screen. This is a really obscure way to do it, but you can just delete this shortcut. Now when I jump back to the start screen, you'll see the menu item is gone. So if you really don't want users to have access to the store, what I suggest you do is remove that shortcut prior to deploying your custom Windows 8 image. You can also write a script that would remove that shortcut if you needed to make the change to computers that were already deployed. So let's move on to our next demonstration. Now let's talk about sideloading apps. Now back with desktop apps, whether in Windows 7 or Windows 8 or earlier versions of Windows, you can just download them from anywhere on the web and installing like normal. With Windows 8 apps, the so-called Windows Store apps, you can only get them from the Windows Store normally. And this sounds restricting, but in my opinion, it's actually a good thing, because it's really the cure for malware. It gives Microsoft the chance to review every app that comes through. So you don't have to worry about whether an app might have malware. Somebody else is looking out for you and kind of channeling every app you can get through a nice review cycle. I think that's really important. It doesn't always work that great for enterprises who often develop their own custom apps. For example, they might create a custom app to keep track of customer orders or inventory or their personnel, the hours that people are working. So let's take a look at how you can sideload independently developed apps in a Windows 8 environment. This is my Windows Server 2012 machine. It's a domain controller, and we're just going to take a look at a couple of group policies that can be applied to all the computers in your organization. There are two policies you need to update to allow apps to be sideloaded. The first is under Computer Configuration Policies, Administrative Templates, Windows Components, and then App Package Development. You need to enable the Allow All Trusted Apps to Install policy. Doing that will allow any Windows 8 enterprise computers that are joined to the domain and currently communicating with the domain controller to run any Windows 8 app that you create independently, sign, and distribute throughout your organization. If you have PCs running Windows 8 or Windows 8 Pro or Windows RT, they won't be able to run these same apps. This policy applies to Windows 8 Enterprise only, and as you recall, Windows 8 Enterprise is only available to software assurance customers, basically volume license customers, big enterprises. And I'll say it again, those enterprise computers must be connected to a domain and actively communicating to a domain controller. So if they're away from the domain and they don't have, say, a VPN connection back to the enterprise network, they won't be able to run these side-loaded Windows 8 apps. Now let's take a look at the other policy that you need to configure. Under Windows Settings, Security Settings, and Public Key Policies, you need to configure the client computers in your domain to trust the certificate chain that is used to sign your sideloaded apps. So let's talk about what a public key infrastructure is. There's this technology called cryptography, which you're probably familiar with. Encryption is one aspect of cryptography. Another is digital signatures. Digital signatures allow an organization or an individual to sign a document, a file, an application, and prove that it comes from them. Now, a public key infrastructure issues these certificates, and a public key infrastructure starts with a root of trust, so-called root certification authority. The certification authority has its own certificate, but it also issues other certificates. So the way most enterprises work is they have one trusted root certification authority. It's a computer that runs this public key infrastructure software and just issues certificates to individuals in the company and computers in the company. It'll also issue certificates to developers, developer certificates or publisher certificates. So when your developers create an app that's going to be sideloaded, they will sign it with their own certificate or the certificate of their development team. And it needs to be trusted by any computers that are going to be running that sideloaded app. Now, in an Active Directory environment, by default, all computers will trust the domain's root certification authority. So some of this might happen automatically. If the developers in your organization use certificates issued by the certification authority that's already trusted in your domain, then all you need to do is to distribute the apps using the software installation in the domain, and they'll work perfectly. You don't actually have to add a new certification authority. However, they might very well have a different chain of trust, in which case you'll need to add the certificate to the list of trusted root certification authorities so that your client computers will trust it and any apps created by the development team. So as you can see, I right-clicked trusted root certification authorities and then picked import. Now I'll just get their certificate. Basically, you'd ask your developers for their certificate and they would give it to you. It'd be in a file like this, and then you'd run it through this certificate import wizard and store it in the Trusted Root Certification Authorities node or the Trusted Publishers node down here. You basically just accept all the defaults and it imports it. And now, after this group policy applies to your client computers, they'll be able to run the sideloaded apps that you install through the software installation. So that's a pretty straightforward approach to sideloading apps when you're using an Active Directory domain and using Windows 8 Enterprise. If you want to sideload apps on Windows 8 Pro or Windows RT computers, it gets a little more complicated. So let's take a look at that process. Here we are on my Windows 8 computer. The easiest way to get a developer license is to use PowerShell. So I'm going to search the start screen for PowerShell, and I need to run it with administrator privileges. So I'm going to right-click Windows PowerShell here, and then click Run as Administrator. This opens up a PowerShell window. Now, if you don't know, PowerShell is a scripting tool. Basically, you can write little, very simple apps with it, typically used for performing administrative tasks. So if there was a task like adding a group of users that you found monotonous, you could write a PowerShell script to automate that monotonous task for you. It's terribly useful. We're not going to go into a lot of detail about PowerShell, but it does have a command that's useful for registering for a developer license. And that's what you'll need if you want to sideload an app on a Windows 8 Pro or Windows 8 computer or Windows RT computer. Anything except for Windows 8 Enterprise, you'll need this developer license. So the command that you run is show-Windows Developer License Registration. And a prompt appears that basically tells you that this is the way you get a developer license. Now let's take a look at the wording of their warning here. First, you can tell it's called a developer license and not a run whatever app I want license. Microsoft is pretty serious about this. They really don't want people downloading this new style of app from the internet and just running whatever they want. It sounds restrictive, but again, I think it helps protect you from malware, and I genuinely think it's useful and important. So they warn you here, you may use this developer license only for the purposes of developing, testing, and evaluating apps. That means you're not supposed to use it to actually run apps. So don't think of this as a way around the Windows Store restrictions. And if you don't believe me, Microsoft can monitor what you're doing with your developer license, and if they find out that you're not just developing and testing apps, they'll pull your developer license and you might not be able to get another one. So I'll click I agree and go ahead and get my developer license. Now you'll need to sign in with a Microsoft account, and this is how they basically tie it to an individual person. Now once I get my developer license installed, then I'll be able to run any Windows 8 app without going through the Windows Store for the period of the license expiration. So this is about 1 month in the future. And then every month I'm going to need to renew my license. So as you can see, if they think I'm abusing it, they'll pull it, and when it expires, I won't be able to do anything else. So with your new developer license, you can go and develop an app or receive an app from a developer that you're testing. And to install it, you can use the command add appex package, and then you specify the name of the app, which will have a appex file extension. Appex packages are basically the Windows 8 way of doing Windows installer apps. Now, Windows installer apps still work fine, but they're for desktop apps. So if you want one of the new immersive Windows Store apps, what they call the Metro apps, you're going to receive an appex package from your developer. And if you're interested in developing yourself, check out Visual Studio Express. They're great tools, and Microsoft releases them free to developers. Now, there are, of course, versions of it that you can purchase, but the Express versions are sufficient for making your own Windows 8 apps and even getting them listed on the Windows Store for sale. So check out Visual Studio Express if you get the chance. Now, there is one other option. If you are running Windows 8, Windows 8 Pro, or Windows RT in an enterprise environment, that's an organization that has a software assurance agreement and a volume licensing agreement with Microsoft, you can get a sideloading product key, at least theoretically. Now, in practice, it doesn't look like Microsoft is rolling out these sideloading product keys yet, but they've promised them soon. So talk to your volume licensing representative at Microsoft about how to get a sideloading product key. Once they give you that product key, you'll be able to use it to register the Windows 8, Windows 8 Pro, and Windows RT computers in your organization to run sideloaded apps, just like you can now with the Windows 8 Enterprise computers. This is Tony Northrup for Train Signal, and I hope you found the lesson both educational and enjoyable, and I'll see you next time.